Welcome, everyone. Thanks for standing by as we have been experiencing technical difficulties with going on Facebook Live. This is the virtual opening of the Anthropology of Motherhood, Culture of Care art exhibition that's showing at Carlow University Art Gallery. And I am so excited to show you and introduce you to the curators of this incredible show. This exhibition is an exploration of the right and rewarding work of caregiving and maternal feminisms, among many other things. So I'm going to introduce everyone, just one moment. Can you all see my screen? Great. So the Carlow University Art Gallery virtual opening is during the time of the pandemic. We're just kind of introducing the exhibition. You can view more on our website at anthropologyofmotherhood.com. You can also schedule your visit with the Carlow University Art Gallery to view all the amazing work in person. And that will be there through the end of January 2021. So a little bit about the Anthropology of Motherhood project. It is an ongoing curation of artwork and design that engages in the complex visual, material, emotional, corporeal, and lived experiences of motherhood, caregiving, parenting, nurturing, and maternal labor. So again, for more information, you can go to carlow.edu/gallery to schedule a visit in person and to practice safe social distancing while you do so. So a little bit about our incredible curators. We have on the left hand here, Fran Flaherty. She is the creator and founder of the Anthropology of Motherhood project. She's a deaf artist living in Pittsburgh. She's a first-generation immigrant from the Philippines. And her work is centered on issues surrounding immigrant family relations and assimilation, maternal feminisms, disability aesthetics, and social work. You can find out more about her on our website or on franflaherty.com. And on the right, we have Dr. Amy Bowman McElhone, who currently serves as the Art Program Director, University Art Gallery Director, and is an assistant professor in art history at Carlow University in Pittsburgh, where she curates transdisciplinary, justice-oriented exhibitions and aims to cultivate the gallery as a space for experimentation and dialogue. She's the curator of this current exhibition, and yeah, just really incredible work. You should, if you've seen her previous exhibitions that she's curated in the space, really amazing stuff. And right now I'm actually gonna give it over to Amy really quickly so she can thank a few folks.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was an amazing introduction and really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who is on the call. Again, we apologize. I swear we practiced this, so we're gonna blame Facebook for our technical difficulties. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure to acknowledge a few people that helped make this exhibition what it is. In addition to the amazing artists who I'll list here, Emily Page Armstrong, Sandra Bocci, Jamie Bird, Crystal Ann Brown, Tara Fay, Valerie George, Amy Gilmore, Alex Costu, Lioness Collective, Kim McMahon, Sue Powers, Lindsay Peck Sherlum, Sarah Simmons, and Grace Wong. And the Linus Collective artists are Olga Brindar, Jessica Moss, and Kristen Russo. And so those are the amazing artists that are being featured in this exhibition. And I also wanted to acknowledge people behind the scenes that helped make this happen. So first I want to acknowledge Katie Winter, who was a former student of mine, who's an alum of Carlow University in 2020. And she's currently in the Master's of Arts Administration program at Carnegie Mellon University. And she was our curatorial assistant this summer for Fran and I, and she did an amazing job and really helped us out. I also want to acknowledge Josh Ice, who was our installation guru, who helped hang and light the show. And Josh is a light and installation artist. He also works at the Mattress Factory. I would also like to acknowledge Emily Armstrong, who is also a Carlow University 2020 alum, who also assisted as an intern this summer and is featured in the exhibition as well. So it's a big thrill to have her in the show. And lastly, I just wanted to acknowledge the students that helped with the show and the installation and all the boring administrative work in my Curating for Justice class. And those students are Sarah Smilowitz, Anna Marie Barberka, and Alexis Westwood. And lastly, I just want to thank Carlow University. I want to thank the Carlow University College of Arts and Sciences for funding the gallery, and for Dean Matt Gordley, who was particularly had the vision and was very adamant that we continue to have physical shows during the pandemic. And so I really appreciate everybody's patience as we're kind of embarking on this new modality of both the kind of a digital presence as well as a physical presence. And hopefully as we move along, we'll become become a better hand at it. And then I wanted to also read a statement. You might be familiar with statements when you go to museums, and if there's content that's either graphic or even if there's flashing lights, you might have some type of trigger warning, some type of warning, for people physically. And so I thought long and hard about a kind of statement that would be needed for this show. And I realized that the statement itself, the fact that I would have to write something like it to do a disclaimer for a show like this, I would say was a bit frustrating, given everything that is in the show is a natural processes of life. So here's what I wrote, and I like to think of it as not just a please be advised statement, but as something that, takes a stand for the artwork and for the ideas that the show is about. This exhibition attends to the bodily experiences of motherhood and caregiving, which are often stigmatized in Western culture. As such, there is imagery that represents female reproductive anatomies, childbirth, breastfeeding, and the experience, both spiritual and corporeal, of a mastectomy. It is the undertaking of this exhibition and gallery to facilitate a space for dialogue, conversation, and discourse in order to countervail social injustices, including, but not limited to, the stigmatization, objectification, and marginalization of women. Embodying our mission of social justice, Carlow University's mission of social justice, this exhibition foregrounds the lived experience and visual representation of motherhoods, caregiving, and the ethics of care. So welcome, and I'm very excited about the exhibition and the conversation that we'll be having with my good friend and collaborator, Fran Flaherty. And with that, I want to throw to Fran, and I was hoping if you could talk to us about the Anthropology of Motherhood project, its origins, and sort of how it's evolved and where you see it going.
Hi, I think I just unmuted myself. Did I?
Yes,
okay.
You did.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Amy, and thank you for that that statement in the beginning. I think that's really important as well, being that the whole exhibition is about the culture of care. It means that we have to think about, put ourselves in other people's shoes, and think about where people are coming from instead of what we want to put out think about how we can help people through certain experiences. And I think that's a very poignant way to start the show, by saying that there are some images that might be disturbing to the audience, but it seems like caregiving, or the act of care, it's not a very beautiful or sexy thing, you know. I mean, just like aesthetically speaking, you know, when you're taking care of a baby, you have to change a diaper. That's just kind of like, ugh, you know, or if you're taking care of the sick, that kind of thing. So it's natural to expect that that a show like this would have some of those images. But I think what's more interesting is that despite a lot of uncomfortable images that we might see in the culture of care, the artists in this show have been able to take these visuals, this artifacts of care, and created them into fine art, and just created them in a way that's just beautiful and easy to present, and compelling images. So yes, but the story, the genesis of Anthropology of Motherhood, of course, starts with my my first child, who was born in 1998. It was a time that in my life that I was trying to figure out how to express the deep need, or the deep value that I felt as a mother. Every mundane thing that I did, I valued very much, whether it was changing a diaper, or, you know, feeding, giving a bath, and things like that. But it was so, as you're having children and you're going through life, or even if you're taking care of an elderly relative, or a younger relative, and even if you're a teacher, the act of giving care is just, it's very intense. And so we forget the small little details of what happens in between. And the very first Anthropology of Motherhood, which is all about postpartum, like how you're dealing with newborns, is all about those little experiences that that are these little valuable experiences that we just sort of like, they just kind of fizzle out in our memory, whether it's you're looking at your child lovingly in the eye for 10 seconds while, you know, while you're nursing, or giving them a bottle, or things like that. So that was the start of the concept, and it's evolved over the years to include many other acts of caregiving, and in the larger concept and what that means. What is the micro of taking care of children, or being a mother, and the macro of what that means of being a caregiver, or being being a steward of the planet, a steward for others, and what kind of labor that this requires of us. And it sounds like a very lonely thing. It sounds like, you know, as I was a stay-at-home mom for 5 years, and I found it to be very lonely. I found that, no, changing my child's diaper did not give me fulfillment, although I wanted to do it and I needed to do it. But exploring this allowed me to see that most of us who are caregivers are living this life alone, by ourselves, but we relate to each other. And that's kind of the culture that's come out here in the United States, at least, from what I'm seeing. So the show's developed into both an aesthetic and a functional installation, where I'd set up these installations for nursing mothers to come in like big events such as the Three Rivers Arts Festival. It was a special place with art for nursing mothers to come and nurse their babies and make them feel special. But as we were going through all of this, I realized that we really needed to expand the meaning of care and motherhood. It's not all about mothers and babies, obviously. Otherwise, that would be very boring. It's time that we redefine what it really is to be a caregiver and what that culture of care is. And so the concept of anthropology of motherhood is always about highlighting, giving value to the mundane acts of caregiving, not only from a mother-child perspective, but through a more macro perspective. What does that mean? And how important is it to our existence? Does that make sense, Amy?
Yeah, it makes sense, Fran. Of course it does. Well, I wanted to touch on the fact that kind of the initial idea for this show, the idea for the show was actually very, in many ways, novel, in the sense that you were really trying to create a space that was both a space for aesthetic contemplation, which is typically what a museum or gallery functions as, but also transgress that idea. And instead of it being a transgression in a negative way, it was a transgression in a positive way. To then frame it around a space that, even though it is kind of legally mandated in workplaces, for instance, that there be a designated area for pumping, for instance. And now you'll see, you know, in airports, or when we used to go to airports, various nursing little pods that will pop up. And it's amazing that it has taken this long to recognize that, you know, maybe it would be nice to have a comfortable space for a baby and a breastfeeding baby or a pumping mother to go. But to reimagine that and center that as part and parcel of the exhibition and of art making and of creative practice and of a generator of a generator of art in itself, I think is amazingly radical, even though I think the whole point of a show like this is that it shouldn't be radical, right? And so
this is why we work together, Amy, because you really get it.
I work together because I love listening to your ideas. I love the just the ways in which you come at things that, I don't know, make the world more vibrant and more exciting and more challenging. So that kind of brings us to how it got to Carlow, because unfortunately this year, the pandemic really kind of threw a monkey wrench in having that physical space, that hybrid space, the space that is a space of nurture and care for not only mothers, but caregivers generally. And they don't have to be women. They can be men, they can be relatives, they can be babysitters, all sorts of you know, identities that rotate with that. So the show ended up being a virtual, digitally native show as part of Pittsburgh Three Rivers Arts Festival's you know, festival this year due to the pandemic. And that, though, I think really highlights the necessity of an exhibition like this to think about caring and caregiving, especially in this moment when it is front and center, and it is probably the most important thing that can be occurring right now, is that centering of caring for one another. And so then as a result, we were able to bring the show into physical manifestation at the Carlow University Art Gallery, which has been a thrill because the work was so amazing. And initially when the artist submitted it, it was still kind of early-ish in the spring where, you know, it could have gone either way. Like the Three Rivers Arts Festival was still on. The pandemic hadn't really come into full bloom, if you will. So the fact that we're able to, you know, have the show allow the artwork and the artist to have a space and to be seen is really exciting. But to that end, I wanted to also say that as I was reviewing a lot of the artist statements about the work in the show, and we'll delve into more of the specific works and what they kind of are doing, what they're trying to say. A through line was many of the artists talked about storytelling. And while it does seem kind of obvious that artwork, whether it's visual art or music or performance art or fiction, obviously, is essentially has a narrative. It's built into it. It's communicating something. The fact that many of these artists, when they talked about their work, talked about the centrality of storytelling. And I thought that was an interesting connection and thread that kind of stitched a lot of these works together. And I'm going to throw to you, Fran, but before I do, to kind of ruminate on this idea of storytelling and the fact that, again, it's centered in how the artists represent and articulate their work, is I think it speaks to this notion of voice. And I think it speaks to this notion of having this experience of not just mothering, but also going through illness or being the person that caregives, that it usually is invisible labor, right? And it's not talked about. So telling the story, the telling of it, is then very, very important. And I guess I can't really emphasize, just somebody who has worked in the field, that this type of show doesn't happen. Like, there's not like all these exhibitions on like mothering and caregiving, and in fact, there's a number of the artists in the show have actually talked about how when they started making work about their parenting, their identity as a caregiver, that a lot of times it was dismissed by their professors or by people that weren't really interested in showing it. And it's because this subject matter is not something that's highly visible. And so I think, the aim for me at least, and I think the aim for you too, Fran, is to make a show like this not be radical, even though it is very radical. So anyways, I wanted to throw to you in terms of like your thoughts, Fran, on this idea of storytelling and its relationship to the project.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is really how it all started. I was telling my story of what it was, what I felt like being a mother, and in particular, being an immigrant mother in the United States and having mixed race children. It was very important to really get into my vulnerability, open up my vulnerability to everyone's. And so when you're talking about the story, when you're telling the story of how you are taking care of your children, the most valuable humans in your life, you then begin to let people into your life in such a way that, it makes us most vulnerable. I just feel like one of the statements that I wrote in my first exhibit was this was the most intimate exhibit that I've ever had, and in fact still the most intimate artworks that I have made in the beginning, and that was the first Anthropology of Motherhood, where I had preserved breast milk in resin and turned it into jewelry, not just my own breast milk, but other women's breast milk as well. And so that was a way of telling that story. And as we went along with the show, more stories started to come out. Like I said in the beginning, it felt very lonely at first. And then you realize through art, right, through the visual art, the things that people make, we are sharing this narrative. We all have this very similar story. There is a common thread that runs through it. And to just reiterate what you said, this is not a subject that is often seen as high art or art that is worthy of museum spaces. And the question is why? Why are we in a situation where we cannot seem to elevate the acts of caregiving or even the sentiment of care. You know, I have an experience with a lot of different artists, collaborating, making work together. And sentimentality is not a good thing in artwork. You know, you don't want to be that sentimental fool who makes, like, you know, cutesy wootsy work or whatever. But that's the problem is we're thinking that the culture of care or the acts of care are sentimental things, when in fact they're typical things in our life that we need to do as parents, as children. And again, the question is, why is that not more important holistically in our lives? Why do we not think about it when we are in our restaurants or businesses or, you know, school institutions? We do not put compassion in the forefront of our minds when we're building, building architecture, let's say, or we're making business plans, or any sort of, like, in building utilities, you name it. We do not think about the others or the most vulnerable while we're doing it. And that's what bothers me the most, and that's why I'm so persistent with Anthropology of Motherhood, because the message is to try to incorporate this train of thought into all the actions that we do, whether it's a business action, an art action, an institutional action. Let's think about how we can best serve the inclusively before we decide on how we go about things. I like to compare it with universal access or universal design, where we're, you know, architects, they design a building that's universally accessible to people who have mobility problems or hearing loss or vision loss and things like that. Because if you start forming concepts of institutions and spaces with that in mind, you tend to not exclude anybody, and you reach a larger number of people. So yes, so the storytelling, our own very intimate storytelling, will lead to, in my point of view, it lead to that, where we're raising and creating people of compassion who will then in turn return this act of caring or feelings of caring.
Absolutely. And I wanted to, you know, kind of jumping off of your idea of universal design, and as somebody who is hearing impaired, who knows what that feels like every day, to walk into a space or to encounter things that people with hearing would take for granted, and to always be, you know, things aren't designed for you. And I just heard on NPR today that the Guggenheim is actually doing this. It's called The Mind's Eye, in which they are narrating the experience of walking into the Guggenheim, moving around the space, encountering the artworks. They're narrating it all through language, and they have actors coming in and performing essentially these narrations. And then the idea is that it's actually made available as a in place of the experience of going to the Guggenheim, and that it actually, while it's benefiting all of us right now, because to go into a museum or to go into any space is dangerous, and there's a spectrum of danger depending on you know, your own kind of position within the vulnerability for COVID. So now we're all in a position where we have to think about where we go, how we engage with things, what is safe and what is not. And this way of storytelling, like literally storytelling, like walking into the atrium of the Guggenheim, was also provides more access and universal design, because with those narrations, somebody who's blind can then experience the Guggenheim, and even someone who is deaf, for instance, that can be translated into a visual language or sign for that person to experience. So the pandemic has forced us to put these things at the forefront. And I also wanted to talk about like the whole idea of like the labor aspect of it and value. And I wanted to do two things and then kind of send it back to you, Fran. But I was going to read a statement that was part of the curating statement for the show, and then point to one of the artists whose work is really much tied into this. So in many societies, the unpaid labor of care is largely taken up by women. And the global pandemic of 2020 has made this overlooked fact highly visible. Whether it is revealed in attending to children while in quarantine, caring for isolated older relatives, providing sustenance as essential workers in grocery stores, or working on the front lines in hospitals as healing professionals, women bear the brunt. Post-colonial scholars Cho Hao-Juang and Ueno Chizuko seek to de-gender notions of care, stating, quote, "The labor of caring can no longer be designated the work of women, cannot any longer be free labor, nor can it be the cheapest kind of labor. Some people are already living a politics of care that views the condition of depending on others either as a form of humiliation nor an invisible sacrifice, but as a right and rewarding work," end quote. And I think this thinking about care and labor and value systems and the way in which we attach value to certain types of labor, and we don't see this work or this labor as being of value and as being something that's hidden, I think is a big part of this show. So Sarah, I don't know if you can switch to, okay. So we have two artists that I just want to call our attentions to for this particular topic. And I am new at maneuvering this gadget, so please bear with me. Crystal Ann Brown's Momument, so play on monument, it's monument, that really takes the idea of domestic work and creates a monument out of it, monumentalizes it, memorializes it. And what's striking about the work is the ways in which it plays with control and chaos, right? So it looks, so just the stacking and the height of it, the scale is, overwhelming. And I'm sure everybody has that feeling with the mounds of endless laundry that will build up in a home, especially a home with multiple people in it, especially a home where half the people can't do the laundry. And actually, there's a really great article on Vox about how laundry in particular has been the one thing that the modernization of the home hasn't been able to eliminate, and in fact has made more work. So unlike a dishwasher, for instance, which takes away the labor of washing dishes, laundry actually changed, like washing machines actually changed how we view clothes and their cleanliness. So in the past, when people were wearing leather or wool garments, you actually couldn't wash them because it would damage the material. So people didn't typically wash their clothes frequently. It wasn't really until the late 19th century, early 20th century, when some of those aspects of laundering became mechanized. And then the problem is that it became easier, it became cheaper, and then yet it didn't eliminate the need to wash it. And then also the introduction of cotton as a key kind of material for garment. And then we could have a whole conversation too about cotton and the systems of exchange and the product of enslaved people and all of the politics and the raciality that are tied into that. But once cotton became prevalent, it needed to be washed more. And so And now we've gotten to the point where we don't wash less, we wash more. And we are actually, there's an expectation that we don't have stains on our clothes. So like it has become socially unacceptable to not wash as frequently. So anyways, this, I think like that article and then like revisiting Crystal Ann Brown's monument is like this like never ending growth and you know, explosion of this form of labor that is very much tied to domestic labor. The other thing about it from like an art standpoint, a visual standpoint, is that she's really playing with too, like the repetitions and the gridded, rigid formality of the plastic laundry baskets. And that if any of you have ever taken an art history class or an art class, the idea of the grid, the picture plane as a grid, it's very much tied into the history of art, especially into these like very hyper-masculine modes of creating art, whether it's minimalism or abstract expressionism. And then also those are mass produced, again, ties into kind of commercialism and commodification. And then that in contrast to the sort of chaotic blob of laundry that is, you know, unconstrained and bursting out of it at its seams. And then another artwork that I wanted to point our attention to, at least when it comes to this topic, is Amy Gilmore's Pushed and Pulled, which are these two objects right here. I'll zoom into it in a second. But they are two chromed objects. And if any of you who have either breastfed or pumped or fed a baby, you'll recognize these as a chromed breast pump shield and valve, and as a bottle with a nipple. And in fact, Amy told me that when she made this work, and she was in grad school at the time, her professor actually did not know what the breast shield and valve was. He thought it was like some type of, I don't know, horn or amplification system. So she had to explain that to him. But she talks about how her work reflects the process of archiving and often devalued routine, and about motherhood in general, and accentuate her innate desire, these are the artist's words, to cling to both the materials and objects that emphasize the necessity of letting go, which is a play on when you're breastfeeding or pumping, the letdown, right, when the milk comes out. The other thing about it is this idea of artifacts. You talked about these artifacts of care. And so that's very much kind of part of this, built into this work too, is like these artifacts, these collection vessels, and kind of what you were talking about earlier, Fran, about how your first works that were dealing in this space were, you know, creating, you know, preserving your breast milk, and the resin, creating, you know, saving it and within, archiving it, preserving it within resin. But this idea of like collection and and like all these different meanings, because you're collecting, when you're pumping, you're collecting the milk to then give it back to the baby, or you're collecting the milk to just dump it out, or you're collecting the milk to like put it in your freezer to store up in case the apocalypse comes, which has happened. And she also even uses in her statement the monuments to motherhood, and in that when she talks about, I cling to the now discarded objects, the relics of their smallness. I save them, I honor them, I cut them apart, I put them back together, I coat them, I encapsulate them, I line them up proudly like trophies, awarding myself the permission to long for the times I once prayed would go by faster. Monuments to motherhood. So anyways, I thought those two works kind of touched on some of the things you were talking about.
Very much so. Actually, Amy Gilmore's work and my work, the origins of it are very similar, and the reasons, the concept for it are very similar as well. I too have my baby bottles and my breast pump shields stored at a place where I can go and still visit them, and enjoy the memories that I had. I particularly did not like breastfeeding. It was painful for me to experience, but I did it for 18 months for each of my children. So there's 3 of them. So that's 5.5 years of breastfeeding. I always tell people,
Whoa.
these are working breasts. Whoa, Amy.
I know. It's a robotic arm. I can't control
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So the
There we go.
interesting about this is that you stopped with Amy Gilmore's work, or at least segued to it from Crystal, is that what are we really trying to achieve here? We are putting these seemingly mundane objects, a laundry basket and things like that, things that are not normally associated with high art or valuable things or things like that, but we put them here in the middle of a gallery, very common objects that most of us are familiar with, and that are equated with labor, intense labor. And so what are we trying to do? Why are we doing this? Well, that's part of reframing the concept of art and trying to create a paradigm shift basically here of valuing these relics of caregiving and labor. And that's really what the intention of the whole concept, the intention of Anthropology of Motherhood and the Culture of Care is to remind ourselves that our actions of care, our objects of care are valuable, and we need to put them in the forefront of our minds and of our practices, whether it's we're going to work, or whether we're stay-at-home moms or stay-at-home dads, whether we're caring for sick, or whether if we are just out in the grocery store and you see somebody who's having a hard time carrying things or whatever. It's about understanding that we're all responsible for each other. I mean, this idea of meritocracy or individualism is such it's such a shallow and new concept, because if you really look at our history over time, we've always been a caregiving society. We would not have achieved our status of the largest species, apart from mammals, I should say, apart from insects, if we did not have a society that cared so much for each other. We could not have grown as humans. We could not have evolved to where we are now if we did not care for each other, or if we did not make caregiving a central part of our lives, evolutionarily speaking. So why is it now that we are all of a sudden, in this area where, being a stay-at-home mom, people are like, oh, you can't make art out of that. And this is, as you're showing this, Amy, Sandra Bakkes was one of the artwork that I really relate to. She's photographed these black and white photographs. They're just gorgeous photographs of broken dishes and dishes in the sink and food allergy jars. And this is particularly a favorite of mine, is she's driving a minivan where she has a list of all of the foods that her children are allergic to, which I think is a beautiful thing. When you're, when you have this collection of things that are just so mundane, but they're put together, but the value that you put on them is actually, it's invaluable, because these things, these acts that we do are essentially life-saving things for our children, helping them helping them to realize their potentials and things like that. Were you saying something, Amy?
Oh, I was going to say that the life-saving sustenance aspect of it is a huge theme of this show. And want to talk to you about Sue Power's work over here. So we have a number of works. This is Emily Armstrong's, and I don't know if you can guess what the title of this is, but it's breast.
No, really?
Lindsay Peck Sherlom's Abscission. which again, we don't have the audio on the video. The video works because of the feedback, but you know, it's an amazing video that cuts back and forth between kind of extreme close-ups and you know, home footage, fast cut montages, slow, you know, slow motion, that kind of represents that collapsing, the rushing, and the slowness of time that happens when you're caregiving, where time becomes extremely fluid, can either seem very fast or it can seem, you know, unending. And the video really conveys that, and the growth of the child. Sue Powers' work, Back to the Patch, and it's another video that will pop up. Here's a image that's called Formula Twins. And it's the story of how when her grandmother gave birth to twins, she had toxemia, and had this would have been in the first half of the 20th century. She had toxemia, and they lived in a mining community outside of Pittsburgh, and those were called patch towns. And so her grandfather was left to care for these two newborns at a time when industrial formula hadn't been created yet. And his wife, their mother, was unable to feed them because she was hospitalized. So he, the fellow workers in the patch town came to his aid, and the African-American workers who lived in the community passed down to him, who he was also an immigrant, an Eastern European immigrant, their recipe for formula, which was flour and water. And again, passed down orally. It's an intergenerational thing. It's again, these kind of like subaltern spaces that aren't mainstreamed. And Sue's grandfather made the formula, and the twins thrived on it, and they survived. So it's through that community aspect. So this is a still from it that was blown up into a print. And then Sue, who's also an instructor here at Carlow, as well as a musician in her own right and an artist, created a video and a song that memorializes it. But again, it tied to these ideas of sustenance and survival and anxiety, and community, in terms of this kind of larger, you know, talking about these larger issues of care. And then I don't know, Fran, do you want me to just keep kind of walking around and we can kind of talk about the works so that we make sure that we...
Yeah, we're also very happy to take questions from the audience. If you just want to throw them in the chat, if you have a question about a particular piece or, you know, a comment. Yeah, I'm happy looking at the show with you, Amy. But I did want to say something about care as well, and the timing of this show, the poignancy of this show with what's going on right now amidst the pandemic, and the protests that are going on, the Black Lives Matter movement that's going on. Caring is also healing. So sometimes when we're talking about laborious things and you know, just taking care of children sick and things like that, let's not forget that a culture of care also is about caring for our mental health and our emotional health. That is a big part of it, which I think we'll be able to see. Well, the one piece I was thinking of Kim's, Amy, but it's an intense sort of intense image. But that connection between emotional healing and mental healing, and how it relates now to us in the middle of a pandemic and in the middle of general unrest here in the United States, especially right before the election. We need to be able to make that bridge and connect that thread because it is interconnected.
Absolutely. And again, like you said, Fran, this idea of caregiving and care and the ethos of care and the whole thing that you lead, as you've taught me, you lead with care. Because speaking of the protests and the pandemic, we have, as a nation and as a culture, have come to accept a very high level of violence in our day-to-day lives and a very high level of suffering. And part of that is the ethos is of competition. The ethos is of zero sum approaches to society and culture, and not providing, and very limited knowledge systems and ways of understanding and making sense of things. And again, because caregiving is usually associated with the female gender, it's usually associated with people who do not have the means to otherwise hire out their care. So there's a class issue, there's a gender issue that's all tied into the devaluing of care, when in fact, I think your thesis statement for this show is really that it should be centered. Care should be centered. I just wanted to point out a couple things. This is Tara Faye's Deities, and I really love Tara's work. And we talked about storytelling. What I love about Tara's work is how she plays with storytelling and with fiction and with myth, and combining sort of the composition and a tradition of fine art imagery and mythological imagery with the sort of banal space of the kitchen, and in these contemporary spaces, and tied into the notions of goddesses and fictionality. I think I really love this particular image. And then also, we just looked at Grace Wong's work. And another theme in the show is intergenerationality. And so this is a lenticular print. So let's see if I can move it. So it changes when you change with it. And it's an overlay of her mother's hand and her hand, 2 photographs.
This is one of the pieces. Sorry, this is one of the pieces that we weren't able to curate in the online version of this show for the Three Rivers Arts Festival because of the nature of the work, and so we're really happy that we were able to exhibit it in person here at Carlow. Yeah,
it's an amazing work. The other, in terms of mythology. Alex Costo, Alex, please apologize if I'm butchering your name. But bookmark 1A name, oops, I will adjust this, is about storytelling and language and image. And you're actually supposed to flip through these. And I want to go and grab Alex's statement, because again, it has some excellent connections to Tara's work, and again to this idea of storytelling. Hold on. So it's part of an ongoing series of bookmark-shaped books on seemingly aimless notions. A name, which is the title of this, is a brief personal reflection on what it might mean to make a person. With images that allude to Greek mythology, Penelope, the name without a girl, stands in for a latent wish to have a daughter. My practice treats books as knots in reality, seemingly small and defined, but dense and labyrinthine. They require close attention to be traced and grasped.
They're lovely, very sort of soft sheets of paper with these just very subtle text in them, and it's just such a loving image.
Yes.
An object in itself that exudes sort of like this subtlety of care, and that's one of the pieces which I really like as well. I like all of the pieces, otherwise it wouldn't be in there. I do love every single piece of that show.
And
this
this
is
work
Sarah
is,
Simmons.
yeah. Do you want to talk about the work, Fran, or do you want me
No,
to?
no, you go ahead. You have the cheat sheet, Amy.
So this is called Scarecrow, and it's an amazing work. I can see if I can get in here. It's a wooden rake with dried flowers and text in those flowers, lace, and it's a vintage dress. Again, tying into the idea, I mean, labor and laundry and clothing and all those kind of symbolic realities, but also the reuse of it and the care in reuse, but then seeing the age and taking something that would otherwise be discarded and making it prominent. But the title is really interesting too, and I just want to get into some of the detail here because there's more text and patterning. It's also called Scarecrow, and it has this very skeletal quality to it, ghostly, if you will. And so I think it really speaks to, it's perfect for this eve of Halloween. And it speaks to, again, the kind of decay or the organicness of life and life cycles as manifested beautifully in, again, a rake, which is a very like labor, a tool of labor, a tool of working the land, with clothing. And also, again, these kind of organic materials that tie into that. And then playing around with void and emptiness and what could be an index of the body. And with that, I wanted to come over and talk a little bit about Valerie George's work. So I know Valerie, I have worked with her. She's an amazing artist. She's also a professor at the University of West Florida. And I took a random sampling of her work, but not so random, because not only did the work that we have on display here, it speaks towards her life cycle as an artist and also as a human. And so I wanted to show first her earlier works that again tie into these ideas of intergenerationality, the passing on, the thinking about and ruminating on relationships to past generations and to future generations. And so this image is from early on in her career. It's called "The Light Is For Me." And it's a photograph it was taken of Artie Missy Brown just before her death. And she was a supporter of Valerie George's choice to become an artist and was often the muse and model of her photographs. So here you have this image of caregiving, and of intergenerationality, and of kind of that moment of passage as well that's occurring, that's really moving. And then this ties into another series that's early on in her career called Recapturing Grace. In it, she restages photographs with herself in it that were originally photographs of her mother. So hold on, let me see if I can, there we go, sorry. So you can see the top image is Valerie's mother. So she writes, inspired by Roland Barthes' Camera Lucida, the series explores topics explored in photographic theory and addressing the notion of the pose and the gaze. And specifically, Valerie George is interested in examining the physical similarities between herself and her mother, while also considering what it means to be a woman photographed, to pose for a photograph and to recreate a photograph. And one thing that's not in that little blurb is that Roland Barthes' Camera Lucida is Roland Barthes was a theorist that wrote about art, wrote about culture, semiotician. But this particular work, Camera Lucida, was him trying to make sense of photography, but doing so by ruminating on a photograph of his dead mother. And it's a really beautifully written piece that normally comes from somebody who writes very theoretically. And so, again, this idea of kind of intergenerationality, of connecting to the past through the maternal. And the other thing too to think about, as Sue Powers' work also brings into the fore, is also thinking about fathers who are maternal. So maternal fatherhood, and the way, and that maternal then becomes more of an ethos or a concept, and not tied necessarily to a gender. And then this kind of rounds out with some of Valerie's latest work. And this series is called Welcome to My Party. And it's an ongoing body of work culled directly from her experience of the diagnosis of breast cancer. So utilizing the aesthetics of 17th century Dutch still life painting, she wakes up in the face of a camera, directly documenting her when she was undergoing a mastectomy, and documenting, as she describes, her spirit in flux and the transformation of her body. And so in particular, this image, I think, is just really amazing. And then its relationship to the light is for me. And the still life is particularly, you know, it's tongue in cheek, but it's also, very moving. So you have these kind of kitschy objects, these lemon candles, because normally in a Dutch still life, they would have actual lemons that they would paint, and it would be just this kind of fetishism of the surface of fruit and of vegetables and of flowers. And also they were very adamant, like in that painting, that genre of painting, to show the blemishes too, to look at decay, and decay as a memento mori, or a symbol or of kind of the relationship and the cycle of life. And so you have these amazing kind of kitschy objects that are then elevated and are tongue-in-cheek relating to the breast. And again, that parallels with the tongue-in-cheekness of the deflated balloons and the welcome to my party kind of ethos of it all. And then if you look closely here, and I don't know because I'm not a nurse, but the pan that's usually given to someone who is in a hospital bed, who's about to undergo surgery. Whoops, hope the video comes back on. Okay, that's about to undergo surgery, and is the pan for which you are to spit or do other things into. And then again with these beautiful faux flowers. So again, we have this cycle of caregiving, the experience of care tied to the maternal body, tied to the female body, I think is really interesting. And just to conclude the artworks in the show, we have the Linus Collective, which is an installation of artwork by three amazing artists. Kristen Russo, who also, among many things, is also a doula, wrote this beautiful poem that again talks about intergenerationality and the lineage of mamas and papas and the comfort that brings. Olga Brindar's work is a way to play around with the notion of the master copy in art history, which is usually the master artist paints the painting, and then the apprentices copy it, right? And you know, as part of that education aspect of it. So here, her daughter is the one that is, it's flipped on its end, where her daughter is the master, and she's then copying her daughter's painting. And so that's what you see here, this connection of education, of the mother following the daughter, of a reversal of those ideas. And here's Jessica Moss's, who's also part of the Linus Collective, a contribution to the work, which is this lovely, lovely stool facing the corner, much like you know, when someone's in trouble and is placed in the corner, although I don't think people do that often nowadays. And then this beautiful "get your balance" statement related to it. So again, this is a really minimal but complex work that references child rearing, that references the ways in like spaces, those like kind of cubby hole aspects of childhood, navigating and finding your lines of morality, what's right and what's wrong, what gets you in the corner and what doesn't, and how that maybe those spaces can be the things that enrich you and retain, help you regain your balance. And lastly, I just wanted to show Jamie Bird's work going forward, looking back. And Jamie is an amazing photographer who is a Pittsburgh photographer and shoots from the hip, as it were. She documents our city, documents the people in it, and this is just an amazing image of motherhood, and motherhood specifically rooted in Pittsburgh. So that's I've covered all the artworks in the show. So Sarah, I don't know, because you were telling me that we don't have much time left. If there's any questions that we want to answer, Fran, if there's anything you would like to.
No, I thought you did a great tour. I mean, I didn't need to go to the gallery. You could have just done this. I could have installed from here at home, and you would have just said, look at this. Does it look okay?
No. I needed your help.
But I think that so really what we're trying to achieve here, and Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, is to perpetuate this concept of the importance of care and elevate the acts of care and art of care. As you're looking at Valerie George's work and some of the old photographs, I hope that people, at least those of you who are watching and those who see it, will relate to it and say, oh yeah, I have photos like that in my house as well. And know that, yes, they are worthy of being put out there to the world, that your experiences are valuable and they need to be shared. And ultimately, this is kind of the concept. This is the paradigm shift that we're trying to help create this cultural reset that we're experiencing, is that we look at caregiving, compassion, sympathy, empathy, as put them in the forefront of our minds when we're making decisions about our lives, whether it's politics, education, building things. If you are in a position of privilege, that you have the ability to decide certain I don't know, decisions in an institution, for example, try to just shift your mind a little bit into thinking of being compassionate, and think of the caregivers, how you can take care of the caregivers before making a decision. I think that it's a concept. I think that it's a very small shift, I think, but it is a pivotal shift, I think, when we start thinking about those things.
Absolutely.
We have a comment here from Christina. It says, I think discipline needs to be reevaluated as we grow as parents. True that. That is so deep, though. I'm like, oh, my youngest one is 15, and I have to say that I have really considered the situation that's happening in the world right now. I have to say I'm a lot more lenient with him right now. I am making sure that his mental health is, he's working on his mental health. And so where does discipline fit in that? I don't know, Amy, you have younger kids, so.
Yeah. Fran, I don't know what I'm doing, so that's that's part of the problem. So Christina, we should definitely take that up on like undisciplining, like unlearning ways in which we discipline, because they are, maybe rooted in not the ethos of care, right? They're rooted in the ethos of punishment and law and order. And then that gets to the idea of like, how are children supposed to relate to society and to adults and to each other? And that's not like a thing that's just a priori. That is, it is a priori. They naturally will build their social bonds and social relationships, but what is governed as good or bad or ideal is a complete social construction and depends on what particular culture and what particular society those children are a part of. So it's contingent. And as Christina said, like rethinking, and then also what you said, Fran, like even just like rethinking just this moment, again, this moment of suffering and loss and grief on so many different levels of uncertainty. It certainly has helped us, if anything, rethink things that we just did, and provide opportunity for reflection to hopefully better ourselves and the institutions that form our society.
So, do we have any other comments or questions that come in? Because we've been online for what now, 90 minutes?
Really? It's been that long?
Yeah, we don't want to have Zoom fatigue here. If there are no more questions, I just want to give a shout out to Sarah Tang,
Yeah, Sarah.
Curator of Anthropology of Motherhood, and we do have a web version of this exhibit, and you can go to anthropologyofmotherhood.com, one word, and you'll also see the previous exhibits that we've had. And Sarah has been instrumental in building that. So Sarah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. And also follow Anthropology of Motherhood on Facebook and Instagram, and follow the Carlow University Art Gallery on Facebook and Instagram, if that's your thing.
You can find us online if you have any other questions. And we're hoping that the show will just grow. This concept will grow. We're planning to give it some legs, make it travel, and even expand it to other, to more artwork. So, you know, if any of you are artists out there, please keep that in mind when you're making your next work, or if you have any work that you think might be pertinent. We're happy to have a communication.
Awesome. And thank you, Fran, because if it wasn't for you, this wouldn't be. So thank you so much for all of your amazingness.
Amy, we weren't going to do this, but yeah, I just want to say to Amy, we can't see you. We're always like looking at the,
that was my plan.
Yeah. So let me just say, this
human.
incredible human being here who was so willing to just take the concept and run. It's really hard to meet somebody in academia who takes an idea and really complements it and shares it. You know, academia can be pretty how do you say, catty sometimes.
Yeah, catty,
but
reactionary.
Yes, but in the spirit of the culture of care in this show, Amy certainly it's complimentary. So I appreciate all the work that you've put in, and thank you for listening to the ideas and taking
Thank
it
you,
forward.
Fran. Thank you so much. And I also want to say that I think my phone has like 13% left on it, so I might disappear. But thank you to everybody that stuck with us, migrated over to Zoom. Like I said, we're going to get better at this, and we have amazing panels that are coming up. We've got a workshop, a poetry workshop with Veronica Corpuz next week, same time. All the programming is going to be virtual Fridays at 4:30. We're going to have a disability and empowerment workshop with Ruth Frabby. We're also, I think, going to have a land acknowledgement workshop. A few of the artists, led by Jessica Moss and Tara Fay, are organizing a 2-part Black motherhood set of panels with Muffy Mendoza. We're going to have a panel on immigrant motherhoods and a panel on art and academia and working and all that good stuff. So there's a lot coming.
Just wanted to throw out there the land acknowledge. So, you know, just keep the schedule straight, guys. November 6th is a poetry workshop. The Friday after, November 13th, Melissa Shaganoff, an artist from, Native American artist from Alaska, is coming to do, not coming, he's virtually doing a land acknowledgement workshop. After that, a good friend of mine, Ruth Fabi, who is the director of the disability arts in in Wales. There's a Welsh name which I cannot pronounce. It's like all consonants stuck together, right?
Yep.
And so those are the that's the programming for November, and stay tuned for our December
Yeah.
program.
Yeah,
So,
and Linus Collective is going to be doing a performance in December as well. So we'll keep you all
there
posted.
go.
Thank
Yes.
you for spending your time with us this Friday.
Appreciate it.
Yep.